Hello everyone, I am Dr. Leena Phate, Head Department of English, Jawaharlal Nehru Arts, Commerce and Science College, Wadi, Nagpur. Today, we will learn what are the different poetical types in English literature. This is the overview of my presentation. We will first see what is subjective and objective poetry. Then we will see what are the different poetical types and study the lyric and the sonnet in detail. Subjective and objective poetry. The poetry on the basis of subject matter is broadly divided into two parts. Poetry treats of two kinds of subject matter which is supplied by external objects such as deeds, events, and the things we see around us, and that which is supplied by the poet's own thoughts and feelings. The former gives rise to objective poetry, the latter to subjective. In objective poetry, the poet acts as a detached observer, describing what he has seen or heard. In the other hand, he brings to bear his own reflection upon what he has seen or heard. The same subject matter can be viewed either way. If the poet views it from without confining himself, that is to say, merely to his externals, his treatment is objective. If he views it from within, giving expression, that is to say, to the thoughts and feelings it arouses in his mind, his treatment is subjective. Objective poetry is impersonal and subjective poetry is personal. In the former, the focus of attention is something that is outward, a praiseworthy act, a thrilling occurrence, a beautiful sight. In the latter, it is the poet himself. Whatever the subject may be, his mind is centered on his own thoughts and feelings. Objective poetry, on the other, is older than subjective. The primitive people among whom it developed, like the uncivilized races in some parts of the world today. We were more interested in what they saw and heard than in what they thought. They valued the experiences of their eyes and ear more than the experiences of their mind. Deep thinking may even have been irksome to them, considering that their life was simple, composed more of action than of thought. Their poetry therefore dealt with deeds, events, and the things they saw around them, and it called for the little mental efforts from their hearers. At the early stage, man has not acquired a subjective outlook which is the product of civilization. The epic and the drama are the forms of these objective poetry in which, as in the ballad, the writer's personality remains in the background. The lyric and the elegy, which belong to the latter times, represent the subjective variety. Now, these are the different poetical types. Poetic forms or poetical types can be understood as the physical structure of the poem, the length of lines, their rhythms, their system of rhymes and repetition. The lyric, the sonnet, the ode, the idyll, the elegy, the epic, the ballad, the satire are different types of poems. Lyric is a short musical poem. This type of poetry expresses the different thoughts and feelings of the poet. Sonnet is a poem of 14 lines. Ode is a serious and dignified composition. It comes from the Greek word "edian", meaning to sing or chant, and belong to the long and varied tradition of lyric poetry. But in the modern context, it includes any ceremonious poem, often in the form of an address. Next is idyll. It is a short lyrical poem giving a little picture of everyday life amid natural surroundings, generally rural or pastoral. The elegy is a mournful song. It can be thought of as a melancholy poem, which is written to mourn the death of someone who is personal and close to the heart. Then is the epic poem. It is a long narrative poem presenting heroic characters who take part in a series of adventures, usually over an extended period of time. The ballad is a short story in verse about the exploits of some popular hero or about an incident of common knowledge. The satire is a verse blending a critical attitude with humor and wit. The satire may be inspired by either a personal grievance or passion for reform. Let us now learn about the lyric in detail. The lyric form is the oldest form which originates from Greek literature. Love for music and dancing is natural to man. They are closely related like sisters. Even before that advent of civilization, man loved music and dancing. These activities are natural and spontaneous. Singing can be of two types: individual singing and group singing. If an individual had a sweet voice, he sang a song. If he did not have a sweet voice, he made use of some musical instruments like harp or lyre. Lyre was the most popular instrument in ancient Greece. Thus, all poems or songs accompanied by a lyre and expressing the feeling of an individual are known as lyric or lyrical poetry. Group singing is known as a chorus or a choric song. A group of people sang and danced together in this form. Lyrical poetry has three important features. It expresses the emotion of one person and only one single emotion. A lyric is a musical composition. A lyric is a brief poem. In lyric form of poem, we will study the origin of the lyric, the characteristics of lyric, the music, the subject matter, and the structure of the lyric. Origin of the lyric. Lyric has a Greek origin. In the beginning, the word lyric was used for any song sung to the accompaniment of a musical instrument called lyre, known to be Greek. Greek song was divided into two classes: melic or lyric song and choric song. Lyric song was sung by a single voice to the accompaniment of a lyre, and choric song was intended for collective singing to the accompaniment of instrumental music, supplemented probably by a dance. The musical instrument lyre made it musical and melodious. True to its Greek origin, it still has two important characteristics implied. It is an expression of a single emotion. It is a musical composition. It is a brief expression of a mood or a state of feeling. Observations through memory and feeling are organized in a variety of ways in a lyric. The language of the Greek song was unpolished. The sweet voice of the singer and the sweet music gave it a musical quality and melody. Let us now see the music in the lyric. Music forms an important characteristics of the lyric. In ancient times, music was provided by the musical instrument called lyre. The lyric was made musical by the voice of the singer. But very soon, the poet discovered that musical effect can be achieved by proper selection and the arrangement of words, and the musical instrument because became out of use. The lyric got its music from the artistic use of rhythmic words. The Elizabethan poets wrote lyric using words of the highest musical quality. They artistically arranged vowels and consonants to produce sufficient music for the lyric. Thus, poets like Keats, Shelley, Tennyson, and Swinburne achieved musical effect by a very skillful arrangement of vowels and consonants. The Elizabethan invested words with the highest musical quality. Their lyrics are incomparable for their word music or verbal melody. There is sufficient music in the words of Keats, Shelley, Tennyson, and Swinburne. The lyric has become independent of the lyre in the hands of the Elizabethan poets. Now, the subject matter of the lyric. Lyric gives expression to a single emotion or feeling. It appeals more to the heart than to the intellect. A lyrical poem is quite brief. When the poet chooses the lyric form, it does not intend to make any long flight. The poet conveys his expressions swiftly, memorably, and musically. The lyric is a subjective poem and intensely personal. Edgar Allan, the American poet, has rightly declared that a long lyric is no lyric at all. Palgrave defined a lyric as a poem that turns on some single thought, feeling, or situation. Now, it goes without saying that the lyric is a subjective poem, for since it expresses the poet's emotions, it cannot help being intensely personal. Now, we come to the structure of the lyric. Normally, a lyric can be divided into three parts. The lyric has its own structure. The first stanza states the emotion which has set the poet's imagination working. The first part of poem tells us the subject which has stirred his heart. We thereby understand the causes of his poetic outburst. This is called a motive of lyric. The second part consists of the thoughts suggested by the emotion. The poet reaches its height of intellectual and emotional appeal in this portion. The poet gives a few examples in support of his thoughts and emotions. In the third and the final part, which is also short as the first, marks the poet's return to his initial first mood. The closing part is intellectual in character with a judgment, a pointed summary, or a sad or happy ending. In the last few lines, the poet gives a sort of personal judgment. To sum up, the lyric is a short poem dealing with a single emotion. It is a musical poem. It is a subjective poem. It is well knit with a definite structure. Now we will study the sonnet in detail. Origin of the sonnet. Then there are three different types of sonnet: the Italian sonnet, the English sonnet, and the Spenserian variety. Sonnet as a form of poetry has become very popular today. The word sonnet is taken from the Italian word sonetto, which means a little sound, a strain, or a tune. The birthplace of sonnet is difficult to decide. Some say that it started in Sicily, which is in Italy. Others say that it started in Provence, means France. Whatever the fact may be, this form was born in the second half of the 13th century. Dante used it from 1200 to 1300 and Petrarch popularized it. There are three types of sonnet: the Italian sonnet, which is also called as Petrarchan sonnet, the Spenserian sonnet, the English sonnet, or Shakespearean sonnet. We will study all the three types of sonnet one by one. Let us first study the Italian sonnet or Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarch was an Italian poet. The sonnets that he wrote were like models for other poets. From its brilliant use by Petrarch, the Italian sonnet is often known as the Petrarchan sonnet. It is sometimes called the classical sonnet. It is a short poem of 14 lines expressing one single thought or feeling. It is a poem with 14 lines. Usually, it has two parts. The first stanza is of 8 lines, which is called octave, and the second stanza is of 6 lines, which is called sustain. It contains an idea charged with a certain feeling. It has a stanza of 8 lines and a stanza of 6. At the end of octave, there is a pause which is called as caesura, followed by a volta or turn in the thought. It is the poem that expresses a single thought or feeling. Milton was an English poet, but his sonnets are of the Italian type. Milton's sonnet, When the Assault Was Intended to the City, gives a good illustration of different characteristics of the Italian sonnet. In the octave, Milton appeals to the commander of the royalist forces to spare his defenseless house and promises to celebrate his kindness in immortal verse. In the sustain, he reminds the commander of similar examples of generosity in ancient history. The octave therefore makes a statement. The sustain illustrates its. There is a turn in the thought after the 8 lines. This is the structure of the Italian sonnet. It is divided into two parts: the octave of 8 lines and the sustain of 6 lines. This poem is written by John Milton when the assault was intended to the city. The octave has two rhymes, say A and B, arranged to the rhyme scheme A B B A A B B A. That is to say, the first line rhyming with the fourth, the fifth, and the eighth, and the second with the third, the sixth, and the 17th. The sustain, the last 6 lines, applies the proposition or solve the problem. The sustain sometimes has 3 rhymes and sometimes has 2 rhymes, different from those employed in the octave and arranged in various ways as CD, CD, CD. Second is CDE, CDE, and the third is CDE, DCE. with a pause or caesura after the eighth line followed by a volta. So, we can say that the rhyme scheme of Italian sonnet is ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE. The second type of sonnet is the English sonnet. The sonnet was introduced into England in the first half of the 16th century by Sir Thomas Watt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, two English politicians who, after their return from a diplomatic mission in Italy, wrote verses in this form of pleasure. Surrey wrote his sonnets in three quatrains, followed by a concluding couplet. Shakespeare used it so splendidly that it is now called after him, not after Surrey, its real originator. The sonnet by Shakespeare, commonly called Remembrance, may be studied as a model of the Shakespearean type. This is the poem Remembrance by Shakespeare. In the quatrains, the poet expresses grief over past misfortunes. All losses are made up by the mere remembrance of a living friend whom he loves. There is no set range of subject for the sonnet. Shakespeare has limited its theme to love. His sonnets celebrate his attachment to a young friend or his love for a mysterious dark lady. In the hands of Milton, the scope of the sonnet was greatly widened. It included almost everything within human feelings and experiences. Now, we can see that Shakespeare's sonnet consists of three quatrains and one couplet. The scheme of each quatrain is different. The rhyme scheme of first quatrain is AB, AB. Second quatrain is CD, CD. Third quatrain is EF, EF. And the couplet rhymes G, G. As the English sonnet is divided into four parts, it has no caesura and volta. Now, this is the Spenserian variety of English sonnet. We have seen that the quatrains in Shakespearean sonnets are all unconnected with one another. They have each their own rhymes and cannot therefore be said to be related structurally, though they are united by their subject matter. Earlier, however, Spenser had evolved a new variety in which each of the quatrain was linked to the other by an intermixture of the rhyme. We will see this is the next slide. This is the sonnet by Spenser. Just look at the rhyme scheme of the quatrain of Spenserian stanza. In the first quatrain, the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B. And this one rhyme is repeated in the second stanza. The rhyme scheme of the Spenserian sonnet A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C, D, C, D, E, E. The second line of the first quatrain is the first rhyme of the second, and the second rhyme of the second quatrain is the first rhyme of the third quatrain. And the couplet stands alone as in the Shakespearean sonnet. So, we can see that there is a little difference between the Shakespearean sonnet and the Spenserian sonnet. Thank you so much for your attentive listening.